Jessup, did you order the code red?
You don't have to answer that question.
I'll answer the question. You want answers?
I think I'm entitled.
You want answers?
I want the truth!
You can't handle the truth.
All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Watch Well podcast. Again, my name is Parker. I'm your host. We've got a great one for you today. We actually are doing a movie review. I know it's been a long time. There's been a lot of you asking for more movie reviews, but it was conference season. We had a couple of conferences. We got a backlog of content. I was really trying to get all of that edited. It takes, roughly anywhere from 2 to 4 hours to edit episodes, and I got behind. So yeah, we had like 20 to 30 some episodes from all the content that we got from the conferences. But today we are back with a movie review. Before we get into that, if you don't mind and you want to support us, if you're interested in the content that we create, check out our website, vindicatedproductions.com. You can go to the Watchwell shop. You can buy hoodies, sweatshirts. We got a Watchwell blanket there that's super comfortable. You can cuddle up with that special somebody, and you can watch your favorite movie, watch it well. And you can support the podcast. We'll bring more content with all those funds. We appreciate anybody that supports. And if you don't want to support us with money, we totally understand. You can subscribe, share the content for free. So we would appreciate that. Today I have Davis Younts on, and we are going to review A Few Good Men. So we've got the lawyer. We brought in the big guns to review this classic movie. Davis, thanks for coming on the podcast, man.
Oh, I'm really looking forward to this. I appreciate all that you're doing. I really enjoy your podcast.
Thank you. We love it. So would you classify yourself as a movie buff?
I would not say that I'm like one of those people that gets into, a lot of details on critical acclaim and things like that. But I love movies. I thoroughly enjoy movies.
So you're a movie buff, but you're not a trivia guy. Is that
That's
fair?
Right.
Is that a fair claim?
That's
okay.
fair.
Yeah. Hey, there's room in the group for those guys. Let's see here. So this movie, I mean, this is a big movie, man. So we got to do it justice. This is a huge movie. Off the rip, before we jump into the bio, setting the stage, just so people can remember, did this movie have any effect on your law career?
That is a great question. So there is a fun story about this movie. So I would say, I was a JAG in the Air Force. So this is the movie that was released, the biggest movie about JAGs, that features JAGs and portrays it. And I wouldn't say it didn't impact my decision to want to become a JAG, but there's a scene in the movie, and we can get into it, where it's one of the early scenes in the movie, and Tom Cruise is playing softball, right? And he's practicing with his softball team. And the prosecutor comes walking out to the softball field, and they're talking about whether or not drugs this guy had in his room were oregano or weed or whatever it was. And they're negotiating a plea deal in this case, an outcome for this case, right there on the softball field. And so I would say that the formulative thing that happened in my JAG career that I look back on this movie is I was at my first assignment as a prosecutor, and I was playing soccer with my office, part of our mandatory PT. And another JAG, I was a prosecutor, he was a defense attorney, so the roles were switched. But he came up in uniform, walked out to the soccer field to talk to me, to try to negotiate a deal in our case, in a drug case, while I had decided to stop playing soccer and go over and talk to him. And he was the one standing there in uniform. In that moment, I just laughed. I'm like, well, that's the most accurate part of that movie. So
well, that leads us into my next question. What is accurate and what is not accurate in this movie? Just to start us off here, because that's pretty accurate.
Right. That part is really real
than that.
Yeah, that part is really accurate. So really, really big picture. If you think about this movie, a lot of it is well done and accurate, right? So every time you watch a military movie, if you served in the military, one of the things that your eye is always drawn to is things like uniform stuff that's not right. Right. So little things about the uniform. So there's a few things like that in this movie. They do a pretty good job, but there's a few little, uniform errors, things like that. Not a big deal. Overall, tone scope of this movie, if you're wondering, is this what it's really like? It's fairly accurate. There's little pieces of it, little nuances of law and other things we can touch on if we have time that aren't accurate. But if you just want to know, is this fairly reasonable to what it looks like to be a JAG, to be engaged in this? Are the courtroom scenes similar to what you might see in a real courtroom? And I would say the answer is yes. Obviously, it's more dramatic. It's more exciting. The moments that they highlight in this trial would be like 5% of any trial where there's a lot of excitement. Real court martials are a lot of waiting around and a lot of, legal motions and argument and things like that. But I would say overall, this movie should get a fairly high accuracy rating, generally speaking. The example of a witness blowing up on the stand doesn't happen very often. It does occasionally. That aspect of it's a little far-fetched. But overall, this is a fairly accurate movie.
Yeah, witnesses don't just randomly incriminate themselves, right?
Sometimes they do.
Okay.
Sometimes they do, but not very often. Not very often.
It's like the dream witness, right? Just tell me the
That's
truth,
right.
even if you're guilty.
That's right.
Cool. So let's is there anything you just didn't like? He's like, this is just stupid. I didn't like this part of the movie, this character, anything like that.
I think there's things about it that kind of annoy you or frustrate you. I don't really think there's a lot in this movie that stands out to me to say, wow, that's so far beyond the pale. That's so cringe that it isn't reality. I think one of the things you have to do when you're going to watch a movie like this, and this is good movies require this anyway, you have to see each of the characters as kind of an archetype. Right. And I think that's what they did well with this. So each one of these characters is a little bit of an archetype. So if you understand what they're doing is sort of portraying it in the extreme or portraying it as a symbol of a sort of quality or sort of person, and you don't take that overly seriously, I think you don't have to get annoyed with it. Like, Kiefer Sutherland's character, that's not a real person, right? There's no real person that's quite that far gone. There are people that are like that. There are shades of that in the military, but he's very much just being portrayed as a stereotype, as an order follower, right? Just this is someone who's just going to toe the line, follow the orders, do whatever he's told, and not think about anything. So almost an automaton. Yes, there are people like that in the military, but that's kind of an extreme stereotype of it.
Yeah, you brought up Kiefer Sutherland's character and the code. I'm now that you're talking about it, I'm like, man, that code really bothered me. Where
right.
What was it? It was you might have to help me out, but it was orders. Or what was it? It's
like a core.
Yep.
It's core first, right? So it's core.
Unit. Wasn't it
God?
Unit, core, God.
Yes.
Something
unit,
like that.
Core, God. Yeah, country.
I was like, man. So as someone who was kind of in that world, what would you say to that?
Well, what's wild about that, and it goes to some of the bigger picture things about this movie, some of the themes that you see in this movie is there's nowhere actually in the military where you're going to see someone say that and say, this is the code, this is what we live by. But you will see that mentality, right? Mm-hmm. And for us as Christians, we see very quickly, okay, what's wrong with his character? Yeah. Where did his character go wrong? He seems motivated. He seems dedicated. He seems to want to do a good job. He wanted to be a Marine. There's these admirable things, but like, where is it off track? And it's that thing. It's unit, core. I mean, it's 3 levels of priority down before you get to God, mm-hmm. number one. And that just gives you a pause, should make you sit back and wonder and say, okay, that's the problem. But the other issue is, what are we really worshiping? What are we really understanding as far as what gives value to our life, right? Mm-hmm. And so that's so apparent in this movie for me. And that's what I was just thinking about as I watched it again, just in preparation for this. Is what's the value? What is driving all these people? What's the motivating factor? And how does that lead them to these things? And that's what just continues to speak to me, because you see individuals that they're worshiping something other than God. They're making an idol out of something. And if you see that, once you see that and you go and watch that movie, this movie again, and you see that, you're just like, you're blown away by how apparent that is, right? So good people doing good things, serving their country for right reasons, and all of a sudden things go off track. And what is it they're doing? Where did they go wrong? And I think you see that. So you do see that in the military. Especially during like the COVID mandate, I represented a lot of Navy SEALs. And the Christian Navy SEALs that I represented that were fighting back against that mandate for religious reasons, the biggest criticism they got from their fellow Navy SEALs was, why are you putting anything over the trident? Right. So think Navy SEALs, they get the trident that they wear uniquely to them. Right. So even more hardcore than Marines, you have these Navy SEALs. And it was clear that the reason other SEALs were so upset with my Christian clients was because they were putting something ahead of the trident, whatever that was.
Can't have two masters, right?
That's right. And so the other thing you see in this movie that I think is just interesting, and it's portrayed at the end, but it's kind of portrayed throughout. You see this in Markinson's character, and particularly the lieutenant colonel who commits suicide rather than testifying, right? He has the evidence that will turn the case over, and he commits suicide rather than testing. But you see what happens to many people in the military. When you make an idol out of something, it's temporary. Mm-hmm. You're only going to serve in the military for a finite period of time. We only live for a finite period of time. But even in your life, even if you're a lifer, even if you serve for 2 decades like I did, it's a finite period of time. And the question is, who are you when you step away and you take off that uniform? What's left? Who are you? What's left in life? And that's a real clear indication of whether or not someone is turning whatever it is they're doing in life and making that an idol, whether it's a job, a position, whatever it is. When you take that away, what's left?
Yeah, it really goes to show you the tragedy that is subjective morality. When you untether yourself from objective foundation in terms of ethics and morality, then that's how tyrants win, right? That's how the underlings get coerced into following the tyrant's rule. Because they don't have a way to objectively take a step back and look, well, this is wrong, think for themselves, and then, dissent from what the tyrant's telling them to do, right?
Right. No, yeah, absolutely. And that you see that throughout this movie, and you just kind of are torn between understanding the desire to say, yes, we need strong men to take stands and defend our nation, right? We need that. We want that. We desire that.
Right.
But what's missing and what happens when you take away a foundational, core truth, Christian values, biblical principles, what happens when you take that away? And I think that's what this movie does well, right? This movie does that very, very well, is paints that picture of what happens when you take this away. And here's the other thing I'll say that I just found funny when I watched this again, right? And I'm thinking, we have to keep in mind, this movie came out in 1992, I think, the early 90s. And the reality is, we were the only war, the Cold War was essentially ending then, right? So the only war we were fighting in, we weren't really, right? We still have troops everywhere, but we weren't really actively engaged in combat. So I think, contrast that to my military career, which was, I was in law school when 9/11 happened. That's when I came into the military. So we're always fighting somewhere, right? Throughout my 20 years. So I was just thinking of, nobody thinks of Gitmo as combat. Right? Like, nobody thinks of going to Guantanamo Bay as combat. Like, that's not what anybody thinks of it or perceives of it. And again, maybe it was a little different in 1992. That was before my time. But at the same time, it's like, tensions were there, but we weren't actively preparing to go to war with Cuba, nor was Cuba capable of alone without support from the Soviet Union and capable of invading the United States. So, and to me, that kind of struck me as like, maybe they're even elevating the importance of what they're doing, right? Like, what wall are we talking about?
Yeah. I think that's a good point. Okay, so let's do an overview of the film.
Sure.
Let's bring everybody back up to speed. Like you said, this is a 92 film, so we're really not worried about spoilers. If you haven't seen it yet, you're on your own, man. So let's run through that real quick. We'll go through some of the actors, and then we'll get into the fun stuff.
Sure.
Go ahead.
Hey guys, real quick, I wanted to update you on something. So we've got our new merch site up and running. Finally, it's been a labor of love. We've got designs back there for hats, hoodies, t-shirts, all kinds of stuff. We've got a blanket back there so that you can grab the person you most enjoy watching films with. You can cuddle up under the Watch Well blanket. You can watch well together with some popcorn. Head on over to vindicatedproductions.com. Check out the new Watch Well site. Buy some merch. Support the podcast so that we can keep bringing you guys really, really good content to ultimately combat the passive consumption of entertainment and bring a more complete worldview to everybody that enjoys movies. Thanks, guys. Really appreciate it.
All right. So A Few Good Men takes place. Essentially, the setting for the conflict is Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. What happens is a Marine is struggling to keep up. He is struggling to perform as he's supposed to. He's falling out on marches, things like that. His chain of command is frustrated with him. He files a congressional complaint, files off a letter to Congress. That generates anger from the chain of command. There's a big meeting between the Colonel Jessup, his second in command, Lieutenant Colonel Markinson, and then a lieutenant played by Kiefer Sutherland, and the Kendrick, right? Lieutenant Kendrick. So the whole plan is they're going to do what they call a code red, which is the term they use when they're creating extra discipline, extra incentive, extra training for a Marine. So they do different things, a GI shower, put them in duct tape, shave their head, things like that. These are the things they do to try to get someone to get with the program, step up to the plate. So what happens is, two young Marines, a corporal and a lance corporal, are ordered to do this by the lieutenant. They go and they, stuff a rag in this Marine's mouth. They duct tape him, and they're going to shave his head, do some other things to him, and he dies. And so the movie is partially about trying to figure out why did he die, what really happened, and then who gave the order. Were these Marines going rogue? And so that's the big picture. It culminates in a court-martial trial where the Navy assigns a very young, inexperienced lieutenant to try the case as the defendant. And he is never really been in the courtroom before, right? There's a classic scene when the first time he shows up to the courtroom, he walks out and says, wow, that's what a courtroom looks like. He makes a joke earlier on in the film that if he gets one more plea deal without having to go to court, he gets a free set of steak knives. So the part of the background for this is this attorney, Lieutenant Caffey, played by Tom Cruise, it's clear that the bureaucracy of the military believes if he is the attorney assigned to defend this case, it will result in a plea deal, that it won't actually go to trial. There will be a compromise. And that's what he attempts to do from the beginning. He has daddy issues, right? His dad was the attorney general, this, famed litigator, very famous, who had passed away. So he definitely has some daddy issues, but that's the big conflict. The whole movie culminates in a scene where Colonel Jessup, played by Jack Nicholson, one of his just iconic roles, one of his best roles that he ever played, is in the courtroom being cross-examined, and Lieutenant Caffey, Tom Cruise, as the protagonist, has to decide, is he going to go at him hard, risking his own career, potentially, if people think he did this in bad faith without the evidence to back it up, he's facing his own court-martial potentially, right? Certainly the loss of his law license if he goes after him hard. And there's a moment in time where he makes a decision. This is his, redemptive moment, if you will. And even though everyone's telling him not to do it, he turns and he goes hard on cross-examination after this Marine Corps Colonel Jessup, who's about to become, I think, chair of National Security Council or something. He's about to get a huge promotion, go to DC, and he breaks him, right? He does the classic thing that we see in the movies that rarely happens in the real world in the courtroom, but he breaks him. And this colonel admits that he gave the order for the code red, and that you think is the win and the culminating scene of the movie, and everybody's going to go home happy because this guy is literally escorted by military police out of the courtroom. But the final scene is the verdict of the court-martial panel. So what you think of as a jury, in the military we call it a court-martial panel. They find these two Marines not guilty of everything except what they call conduct unbecoming a Marine. And as a result of that, they are dishonorably discharged. So they're given what we call a punitive discharge. They're dishonorably discharged from the Marine Corps. And then there's this culminating moment where Tom Cruise says, where they are told, he finally says, look, you don't have to have that patch on your arm, meaning you don't have to wear the uniform to have honor. And that's the moment where there's mutual respect and everyone leaves and curtains. So that's kind of the big picture overview. I'm sure you can fill in some other details, but I think
that's great. I mean, the only thing that I have to add is directed by Rob Reiner. Aaron Sorkin wrote it. It was his breakout screenplay.
Oh, that's right.
I mean, if we can go down the list here, Tom Cruise, as you said, was Lieutenant Daniel Kaffee. Jack Nicholson was Colonel Nathan Jessup. Demi Moore was Lieutenant Commander Joanne Galloway. Kevin Bacon played Captain Jack Ross. Kiefer Sutherland played Second Lieutenant Jonathan Kendrick. Kevin Pollak was Lieutenant Sam Weinberg. And then you have James Marshall, Private First Class Loudon Downey. And then I'm trying to just hit the main ones here. What's his name? Wolfgang Bodison, Lance Corporal Harold W. Dawson. I think I got everybody.
What's funny about this movie is there's a few other notables, right? Like Cuba Gooding Jr.
Yep.
Takes the stand as a witness, so he's in this for a very short period of time. And well, who plays Colonel Markinson? Was that J.T. Walsh? Am I remembering that right? Is that who that was? He's not in a lot. I think he was more a TV actor. But that was a good role for him. Lieutenant Colonel Markinson was a good role for him. Let me look it up real quick.
Yep, you're right. J.T. Walsh, Lieutenant Colonel Matthew Andrew Markinson. And then I didn't know this, but I thought this was pretty exceptional. I knew this was a massive movie, but box office, the budget was $40 million. Do you want to guess at how much money it made worldwide? I'll give you a guess.
Man, $40 million. I'm trying to think. 1992. I mean, it had to have been probably $150 million.
$243 million on a $40 million budget. Isn't that insane?
That's huge.
Yeah, and received 4 Academy Award nominations, including Best Picture, Best Supporting Actor for Nicholson, which clearly deserved.
Yes.
Awesome. So, what is your big takeaway from the movie, brother? Where did you go with this? Because we could go by actor, we could go by plot, or we could just go straight into your big takeaway and then see where that takes us. Up to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think my big takeaway from this is, I'll put it this way. So the last thing I did on active duty as a JAG in the Air Force was teach at the Air Force JAG School. So I taught military justice and I taught trial advocacy to new JAGs as well as like advanced training. And I've done, I don't know what the count is. I've been involved in close to 300 court martials at this point, both in uniform and out of uniform. Right. So a lot of the court martial piece of this, of course, is the part that I relate to, and it's kind of what's there. But the big takeaway, I think, just from a movie watching standpoint, is this tense scene where Lieutenant Kaffee, this young, inexperienced JAG, has a choice to make. Is he going to embrace what everyone else around him sees as his calling and purpose in life, which is to be a great litigator and defend the little guy, right? That's what everybody else sees. And he's resisted that because he's living in his dad's shadow. And I think he's afraid if he's ever going to live up to that. So he makes his choice to go after, whatever it takes. He's going to do the right thing. He's going to go after the system. He's going to go after this colonel, this decorated colonel with all the DC connections, and he's going to go hard and just be prepared to accept the consequences, right or wrong. So I think that's an interesting moment. But the other interesting moment to me, and the takeaway is the Colonel Jessup, the Jack Nicholson character, he made his decision long before he got into the courtroom. And the takeaway for me, and I think this is just interesting when you watch it, is he is confused. He's confused as to why he's being arrested, right? Like his arrogance, his lack of self-awareness is so great that he doesn't understand that he has lied, that he's covered up. Someone who you would think is essentially his best friend has committed suicide. A young Marine has died. And he has no visible remorse, no visible humility.
This is funny. That's what he said.
Right. This is funny. Oh, this is funny. You're going to arrest me?
Yeah, that's right.
So I think, I just think there's those two things that are interesting is we see in the culminating moment of the film, you see one character, Lieutenant Caffey, Tom Cruise's character, making this decision to become what everyone else around him thinks he should be, right? Mm-hmm. And then you see the complete just ripping down and tearing apart of Colonel Jessup because of decisions he had made a long time ago, right? Like this was the end for him, the beginning for Caffey. So I just think there's some interesting things when I think about what that looks like and how that relates to real life and just what that means for us. I think there's a lot in that moment because it really is a beginning and an ending in one moment.
Yeah, I'm tracking right with you. So I look at Tom Cruise's character, Lieutenant Caffey, and I saw a lot of like in scripture we're taught that when you become a believer, you are given a new heart. You're given, exchange heart of stone for heart of flesh, right? And when that happens, you have a different nature, and you develop over time a love for God's word and a love for who Christ is and his commands. And as you grow, you love that more and more, or at least you ought to, right? If you're truly in Christ, you ought to. And I kind of, I know it might be a little bit of a stretch, but when you look at Caffey's character at the beginning, he's existing for himself, right? And he's kind of medicating, and he's like medicating not in terms of like drugs and alcohol, but just medicating in terms of his own self-existence in, I got the plea deal. Like, what was it? The steak knives. And
right. I got the set of steak knives.
He's top dog in getting the plea deals. It was like 40 plea deals in however short of a time,
right.
And young guy, he had what, a year out of law school or something like
right.
that.
Right.
So just a lot of accolades early in his career. So there's this pride on both sides. You talked about Jessup's pride, in that you kind of see the giving over to his own pride, and he's
right.
lack of self-awareness. And then on this side, you have the young guy who's exhibiting very similar prideful characteristics in and of himself. But there's a change, right? So
right.
In Caffey's arc, he goes from that, and Joanne's character really pulls this out of him, right? Mm-hmm. And she's kind of the voice of reason through the film, and she's kind of like pulling this better person, or the person he could be, out of him. And now I'm kind of fast forwarding to the scene where he's in the bar and he's having this realization of like how he sounds, because he's listening to the other litigator.
Yes.
And you could just see how he's starting to hate who he was.
Right.
And how I don't know, I see that in the Christian experience, we'll call it, for lack of a better term, where you remember who you once were, and you kind of hate that over time because you're becoming more like Christ. And,
that's right.
And he's doing very, very similar things where he's like, man, that's what I sounded like. I really hate that. Who am I? What am I going to stand for? Am I going to be bold? Am I going to pursue truth? What does that even look like? What does it cost me? These
right.
types of questions, I think, are really seen in his character arc. Do you have anything on that, or am I way off?
No, I think you're right. And I think what's interesting too is, we sometimes think of pride or arrogance as, I think I can do anything. But sometimes our pride actually cripples us. Mm-hmm. In other words, we're so prideful, we're so arrogant that the thought of trying something hard and failing is insurmountable to us. And I think that really was part of the issue with him, right? It was his pride and his appearance and his perception is, I don't care, and I don't want anybody to ever think I care, and it doesn't matter to me because I'm afraid of losing, right?
Yeah,
and that's where the pride came
not
in.
measuring up to dad.
and not measuring up to dad. So if I never actually go to court and I never try a case and I can play everything out and I act like I don't care and I pretend like, none of this matters to me, then nobody will ever see me fail. And he had to be willing to fail, to take the risk and to do the hard thing in order to achieve. And he still had that choice. And again, I think this is just a classic. If you picture the courtroom and this scene in the movie, everyone's been encouraging, Demi Moore's character, Joanne Galloway's been encouraging him. Kevin Pollak's character, great character. Sam Weinberg is a great character in this movie, but they're looking at, he turns back to look at them in this moment where he has to make his big choice, and they're shaking his head no. They're shaking their heads no, right? Like, don't do it. And it's just funny to me because it's like, in that moment, he had to make the choice. They'd been pushing him in different respects, and ultimately was up to him in that moment, just like it's up to each of us in that moment when God is working on our hearts and calling us. So I think that's great. I think you're right on there.
Yeah, and I'm thinking of the scene where Weinberg is talking to him. He's giving him advice. It's the scene where Tom comes back drunk, or Lieutenant Cavey comes back drunk, blows up, throws the stuff off the table. Joanne leaves because he rips her a new one, right? And then they kind of sit down, and there's this, he tells Sam to stop cleaning up, and then they sit down on the couch, and he goes through all these different people and what they would do, and then he says, really, what it boils down to is what you would do.
Right.
What are you gonna do?
Right.
And that gives him new life. So I really thought about that, and this idea of pursuing justice, and why is it the obligation of the Christian to pursue justice first and foremost? And I'd love to get your opinions on that. And then second, what if we were to talk to a secularist, what in their worldview, what is the appeal to justice? What, from like, why go after justice if you don't have Christ, if you don't have a Christian worldview? What's the motive? What's the drive?
Right.
So those two things.
Yeah, no. And so we'll be here for a couple hours. No, I'm just kidding.
Right.
But no, but listen, justice, and this is easy for me to say, as an attorney at first blush. Okay. I'm an attorney and I think about these things, but we are built, we have a fallen nature, but we also are built in the image of God, and our God is a just God, right? And we know we are given insight through the Holy Spirit, and as Christians in particular, we're given insight into right and wrong. And we call it conscious or whatever you do, but we see it. Even the secular world, because they're created in the image of God, will have a strong sense of righteous indignation at things that they perceive as unjust. So I firmly believe it's part of who we are as human beings. We want to see justice. Of course, the real challenge is, and this gets to the second part of your question, is what is just and how do we measure that? By what standard, right? Amen. And that's what's so critical. So we could go a lot of different directions with this, but I will just say that look at the United States, look at the United States Constitution for a moment, and just sit back and realize this. Far from perfect, we shouldn't worship the Constitution as a document, but we can worship the God whose principles it was founded upon. And that's just reality, right? You can't go back and change history. You can try, but you can't. You have to recognize that the founding fathers of this country, fallen men, imperfect, whatever, they were primarily influenced by a Christian worldview, and scripture was in the water. It was in the air they breathe, as my friend Pastor Jeff Durbin likes to say, right? That was just who they are. And even look at the founding documents when they're having these arguments. The two books that were cited the most were Montesquieu, but the second book that was cited the most wasn't just the Bible. It was the book of Deuteronomy. So think about that next time you're going through your Old Testament reading plan and you're reading Deuteronomy, and think about that. Why? Because they recognized biblical truth and a creator God as the foundation of justice. So to me, I struggle as a Christian. I grew up in a Christian home, and I've been a Christian for a very long time now. And I struggle sometimes to see how people expect our system of justice to work without Christian values, right?
Yeah.
And without recognizing what it's founding upon. Because again, all legislation, all law has a moral foundation. So any Christian that tries to say, oh, we can't legislate morality, wrong. We are always legislating morality. Even the speed limit is setting a speed limit is making a moral decision. All legislation, all law is morality. And it's just a question of whether or not it's going to be biblical morality based on God's law or something else. And really in our society today, in the modern Western world, the primary influence is Darwinian evolution, Darwinian sociology, which leads to secular humanism and atheism. So you really have two clear paths in a society. You can have a system based on fundamental truths and justice, or you can have a system based on something else. And that's always going to devolve into who people worship. It's going to evolve into mob rule. It's going to devolve into feeling over facts. And it's going to result in injustice, which is going to create chaos in a society. And we see that. We see that in our society today constantly. We see people who deserve death as a biblical outcome for what they have done, who are not swiftly put to death, who sit on death row forever. And we also see a fallen world where people are condemned unjustly. And so we have to struggle with that. But that's the reality. But again, I look at this and I scratch my head and say, man, why would you even want to be a lawyer in a justice system that isn't based on biblical principles? Because what are you left with? It's utter chaos without it.
It is. That's right. And I think, and that's what I'm really tying back to the movie. So, our podcast, we often say that every movie is a Christian movie. And the reason why we say that is because it must be built on a foundation of truth, love, justice, some type of moral claim, right? And where movies go awry is when the message of the movie refutes the foundation in which it was found, which it was built upon. The narrative, refutes the movie. And so in this movie, it's built on Christian things. It's built on seeking justice. It's built on caring for image bearers of God, and if they didn't do it, if they were following an order and they were coerced or whatever, then they shouldn't be punished for the crime, right? And we should find the actual person that was committing the crime. And if there is no God and there is no Christian worldview, why does any of it matter?
Right.
Like, why do we care? That's just
right.
Who cares? And
right.
so I think it really goes to show, on one side you have Jessup's very subjective rule, right? Very subjective. Hey, I'm saving lives, so my decisions are just.
Right.
Right. It's very one-dimensional. Like, if I determine that I'm saving lives, then it's okay. It's moral. I'm doing the right thing. You need me on that wall, right?
Right.
But there is a moral way in which we should go about serving, protecting our country, and the means need to be moral, is what I'm trying to say. The means in which we do things, there's a biblical way to work that out. And as opposed to, on the other side of this, you have a more objective standard that Caffey finds himself arguing for.
Right.
And then ultimately it culminates in justice for everyone, right?
Right.
Where you have Jessup, who gets arrested for giving the code red order, and then the soldiers don't get off either, because they were supposed to fight for the guy that couldn't fight themselves, and they didn't, right? They followed the unjust order. So there's even justice there that the movie gives us. So this I don't know, I'm seeing a lot of Christian themes in this movie, and it's interesting to me. It would be like, how do you not see, like, you know what I mean? How do you not see that as existing within a Christian worldview? And I'm sure it was accidental. I'm sure that, the writers didn't plan that.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Do you have any other thoughts on any of that? Or
We've all been there.
You've been inspired by a new creative idea, but you've got 3 videos in the queue that need to be edited by the deadline. Or deciding to hire a full-time editor can feel like throwing money at the wall after salaries, benefits, and equipment. It could leave you frustrated and be a burden on your content schedule when editing stacks up. We want to help you bridge the gap. It's really simple. Log into your dashboard, sync cloud drives, and send us your raw files. And we'll do the rest. Worried about the final cut? With our 2 unlimited plans, you don't have to worry about revisions. We'll do it until it's right. We keep you in the driver's seat as content creation depicts the creator. Log into your project management dashboard via Notion for direct, instant communication and watch your project reach each phase of editing until completion. You create, and we just do the work. Vindicated Productions, removing the burden from content creation.
No, I think you're absolutely right. I know that they didn't plan it, but these truths are just a reality, and
eternal.
Again, they're eternal, and we're all created in the image of God. So we can't, we have that desire, that search for justice, and it gets twisted by a lot of things. I think it's interesting, but again, I just think too, Colonel Jessup, this character, this is a decorated Marine. This is a Marine's Marine, but at some point in his military career, for whatever reason, he reached a point where he saw himself as like unto God, right? As right. Like unto God, whether he thought that was because of the uniform or otherwise. So in his mind, his way was the best way, and there was no other solution. And what mattered more than anything else was, his perceived protection of his career and just his absolute arrogant inability to even recognize where he had fallen off and lost track. And that happens. Like, again, I said at the beginning, there's archetypes of this. That is an archetype of a bad military leader. And often those bad military leaders rise to great positions of authority. And sometimes they have done great things. But if it reaches a point where the power becomes intoxicating, no one is speaking truth to them, right? He had yes men all around him. No one is speaking truth to him or pushing back until it's too late. And it can end in tragedy for themselves or others. And you do see that in the military over and over again.
Yeah. And the quote, you said that, like, we need people to speak to them, speak truth to them continuously, right? You said that. It's you live under the blanket of freedom I provide and then question the way I provide it. Well, right. What if you're providing it immorally, unjustly? Right. Like we need, there's a reason why we have checks and balances within our government. Like, it's because the founding fathers noticed that power unchecked goes bad really, really quickly.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So, cool, man. What did you think of, let's see here. So we talked about Tom Cruise's character. We talked about Jack Nicholson's character. Was there anything else? Anything you pulled from any of the other characters? You were a prosecutor, so Jack. It would be interesting to get your thoughts on him.
Yeah, so the way that the Air Force works, so I was an Air Force JAG. So in the Air Force, everyone starts out as a prosecutor first. You may not get a ton of cases, but you start out as a prosecutor first. After you get 2 to 3 years experience, it used to be that you were competitively selected to go be a defense counsel. So the scenario that you see in this movie is accurate to what happens in the Marine Corps and the Navy today, which is someone essentially fresh out of law school could be sent into that defense job, which is a huge challenge. In the first Marine case I did as a civilian, where I was the defense attorney, it was a decorated Marine gunnery sergeant, a war hero, a legitimate war hero, wounded in combat, saving people's lives. And he was being court-martialed, and they, after 18 years of service, and they assigned him, someone who was never been in the courtroom before because they hadn't even passed the bar yet. And, they were just hoping, the Marines were just hoping it wouldn't go to trial until he passed the bar so he could actually defend him. So of course he called me to bring me in to help him out and support in the case because of that. So I just say that to say it's a little different in the Air Force, but what you see in this is, I think, a very good portrayal of a military prosecutor, right? Kevin Bacon's character is just sort of doing the job he's assigned, not really thinking through the implications one way or the other. That's actually a fairly realistic portrayal. And the funny thing, I mentioned when I taught at the JAG school, I never played clips of this movie in anything I taught except his opening statement in this case, when he stands up and goes, these are the facts and they are not in dispute. And actually that's a pretty good opening statement for a military prosecutor. So that's why I would show it. I'm like, yeah, that's the tone, that's the demeanor, that's what you do. So I think Kevin Bacon did a great job of playing less of an archetype and actually playing it true to what you would see. Very, very true to life in his character, I would say.
Yeah, it was interesting rewatching this because sometimes you look at prosecutors as the government, not representing the government, no differently than a defense attorney would represent the defendant. So it was interesting watching that back. It's really easy to look at the prosecutors and say, well, that guy's the government, he's bad.
Right.
But no, his client is the government, right?
That's
is that the correct way to understand it?
Yeah, it is. And our system it's called a trial because it goes back to think of the Middle Ages and chivalry and combat trials and things like that. The whole idea our founding fathers had is we're going to have two sides to a controversy. We're going to designate representatives for each side, a champion for each side, and they're going to go in and they're going to battle. And then that's how we're going to pick a winner, right? So that's the way to think of a trial. And, not everyone thinks of it that way, but that's absolutely right. He was doing a job. He was doing the job he was assigned. His job was very simply to present the best case that he could for the government as assigned. There are moral implications for prosecutors. For example, ethically, a prosecutor is not supposed to move forward with a case if they do not believe that there are some factual basis to support it. In other words, if they don't think there's an evidentiary basis, and they can't hide things, they can't disclose things. But he did the very typical, and I'll just say this, very typical military prosecutor thing, which was blinders on, not looking for anything outside of the box. These are the facts. This is what happened. These are the elements of the case. I'm not looking for anything else. It's not my job to look at anything else. And this is just the very narrow, direct case I'm going to put on.
Yeah. That's a good perspective. I think it's easy to demonize prosecutors. And there's bad eggs everywhere, right? Bad cops, good cops, bad prosecutors, good prosecutors, bad defense attorneys, good defense. There's bad eggs everywhere. But generally speaking, I think it's really easy to associate government overreach and then say, oh, the prosecutors are on that team, when really they're just representing them and doing their job.
Right.
Did you think throughout the movie they did a good job of presuming innocence? Or did they presume guilt? What are your thoughts on that? I was super interested because I kind of lean towards the presumption of guilt, and they had to prove the innocence as opposed to, you know what I'm saying?
Right. No, and listen, that's the reality. It's one of the flaws in our system, if you will, and it's particularly one of the flaws in the real world in the military. So we say, and court martial, just like a civilian jury, a court martial panel is instructed, you are to presume that this individual is innocent. You must not find them guilty unless you're convinced beyond a reasonable doubt that they are in fact guilty. I just don't think that's practically true. Right. Okay. I don't think most human beings walk into a courtroom, begin an investigation or anything else, and are really truly willing to presume that someone is innocent, because the very natural human reaction is, well, why are they charged then? Why would the government go to all the trouble of charging them if they didn't do something? They must have done something wrong. They must have failed in some way. So I just think that's interesting. I think this movie does do a good job of portraying what it's really like, because this was very much somebody's dead. These guys interacted with him, and therefore it must be their fault. And it really felt like they had to prove their innocence. They had to come up with something to demonstrate they were innocent, or they were going to, potentially go to Leavenworth for the rest of their life. So I do think that that's a fairly accurate portrayal as it happens, because it does feel that way as a defense attorney, that you have to cause doubt. You have to poke holes. You have to find something where that court-martial panel or that jury can say, oh, okay, I get it now. We don't have to presume guilt, but that's a huge part of my job when I go into the courtroom. And I do think they portrayed that well.
Yeah. How do you, is there a way to fix that? Where it's, because one thing that I also thought during the movie was they did a good job at isolating it. And I'm sure I'm sure that this is native to military cases, as opposed to civilian cases. And please correct me if I'm wrong. I'm talking out of my league a little bit here, but there's no court of public opinion in this movie, which is kind of refreshing, where it's just the case at hand.
Right.
And you know what I'm saying? So it's not, you know, some of the more modern cases like George Floyd and you know, Derek Chauvin and all these different more modern cases. You have the facts of the case, but then you also have this whole other courtroom on social media and through the media where, you know, they have this court of public opinion, and I don't think that there's any outside of fear of God and, you know, making creating more Christians. I don't think that there is regulating innocence or the presumption of innocence in that court, as opposed to, is there a way to get back to more of a, or maybe it never was truly presumed innocent? I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that's really hard, because so many cases are really tried in the media before you ever get there, right? And so you're trying to pick a jury, you know, of your client's peers. You're trying to pick a jury that can be fair and impartial, but that's really that's a hard thing. And so I think that's just part of the challenge of it. One of the things that I appreciate about military practice, and I think you don't see a lot, you don't see much from the court-martial panel in this case. You see a little bit of interaction with the judge, but one reality of the military is, particularly the Air Force, and each service is a little bit different. They have their own, you know, personalities and customs and culture, but I am often very impressed with court-martial panels in the military trying their very best to follow the law and do the right thing, even when it's hard, right? So one unique difference between military court-martials and civilian cases is if you go to trial, if I go to trial in Pennsylvania in a criminal case and I'm representing somebody, in order to get a verdict, it has to be a 12-0 unanimous vote. It has to be 12-0 unanimous for guilty or 12-0 unanimous for not guilty, or it's a hung jury. That's fascinating, right? That's a fascinating piece of our system. In the military, it's not unanimous verdicts.
Wow.
So, you know, the government, for example, if there are 8 court-martial panel members, the government has to get 6.
Oh, man.
So I just say that to say, when you have that environment, what you will see is you will have cases where a majority, 5 out of 8, could vote for guilt, and 3 could vote not guilty because they think, yeah, you know what, this person may have done something wrong, but I don't think under the law, using the definitions, using the standard and presuming innocence, we get there. And so you might have a 5-3 not guilty. And I do think that happens. I think that happens quite a bit. You never know. One of the things that's different in the military as well, to try to protect the system, in state court and federal court, you can poll the jury, right? Mm-hmm. So because it's a unanimous verdict, but you literally say, okay, jury number 1, what say you? You know, you can do that. And as a matter of practice, you poll the jury. In the military court-martial, because of concerns of outside influence, of rank structure and all of that, and because it's not unanimous, you are no one is allowed to ever reveal how any member of the court-martial panel actually voted, unless it's a death penalty case. So that is a secret that can never be revealed, and the judge makes that order very, very clear. So that's fascinating as well. But there is
really
something freeing about that, right?
To protect from
retribution for not
backlash.
voting the way,
Yeah.
you know, the Marine Corps thinks you should vote in this case, or the Navy or the Air Force. It's
from
it's
the top of the
fascinating.
chain down, right? Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
That's so interesting. That's super interesting. Yeah, that's good stuff. Who would have ever thought that on a movie podcast you'd be learning this stuff, right? A little theology, a little law. That's so fun, man. Okay, so I guess my final question, and I kind of got this. I was doing, I was kind of re-looking at, just war theory a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
I was just kind of on the rabbit trail. I'm going to read this. A reasonable chance of success. This is within Justice of War. There must be a realistic prospect of achieving the just goal to avoid futile loss of life. Like when a government decides to go to war. Is there room for fighting or going to war when you don't have reasonable prospect of achieving the goal?
So I think that's a great part of just war theory, right? And it's something to think about. And again, just war theory assumes as a foundational basis that you will have governments, duly sanctioned, appropriately ruling governments fighting against each other. So the best example of understanding that principle is, if nation one is going to go to war against nation two and they're going to continue fighting the war, then it's only just so long as they have a reasonable chance of success. So even look at like World War One. Take Germany, for example, during World War One. At some point, it became apparent that continuing to fight the war would be unjust because it would just lead to prolonging the war and continued loss of life, right? Both of the German people as well as the Allies in that. So that's just an example to think about. So it brings up a great question: is can there be scenarios where it is appropriate, is reasonable, it is just for a Christian to continue to engage in what would appear to be a losing fight? And I think the answer is yes, but I think we're oversimplifying just war theory if we look at it just in terms of nation states. But there are times when an invasion is occurring and it may appear that you're losing, but the question is, what can you do? And again, one of the challenges we face in the world is America as a nation. We have not always done this well, but at least principally, and at least what you are still taught in the American military, are the laws of armed conflict and the Geneva Convention, the rules for war. So America principally, and officers are taught, and I was taught, it's an inherent part of our training, that we will engage in war in accordance with these laws. We don't necessarily teach Augustinian just war theory anymore, even though we should. But all of the principles in the law of war, the law of armed conflict, are based on just war theory. It's all there. It's all baked into it. The problem that we face in the real world is we often face enemies that don't care about just war theory or the law of armed conflict or the rules of war. So in that scenario, you often have situations where
it's not so cut and dry.
It's not so cut and dried, and you have a nation. You have a nation that recognizes and realizes that the enemy is never going to stop, and they're going to kill everyone. Right? Like there's going to be no quarter. And in that scenario, you just keep fighting to try to let people escape and preserve as much life as you can. But that's the principle. Even in war, just war should be engaged in a way which limits human suffering, even in the midst of war. Unnecessary suffering is still evil, even in the context of war.
Right. Which goes back to Harold. Right. His final comments was, we were wrong because we should have fought for the guy that couldn't fight for himself.
That's right.
So, that's awesome stuff, man. Any final thoughts?
No, listen, I think if you haven't watched this movie or if you haven't watched it in a long time, go back and watch it again. It really is a phenomenal movie. Everything about it is really well done. And I think the character that's missed sometimes, that's a little bit of an unsung hero. And again, I would say this is a fairly accurate portrayal of a character, is the Sam Weinberg, the Kevin Pollak character. He does a great job. He's sort of the quiet. He's not a litigator. He doesn't want to be there. He's not perfect.
No responsibility. Right?
Yeah, no responsibility here whatsoever. But, he has his moment where he encourages the hero to do the right thing. But I think as well, it's just a very accurate portrayal. I mean, that's what you get from a lot of JAGs, right? I'm just going to say it. Like, if you want to know what it's like, hey, a prosecutor, a hardcore prosecutor, look at the Kevin Bacon character, a whole lot of JAGs, demeanor, looks, the way they act, everything else. That Sam Weinberg character is spot on.
That's awesome, man. Well, one more time, where can people find you? Where do you, X, your law firm, anything you want people to know about?
Absolutely. Try to stay fairly active on X. So it's just at Davis Younts. So just my name, at Davis Younts on X. Our law firm is The Military Counsel. So the Military Council, as in counselor, not like lawyer, not council like town council, but themilitarycouncil.com. We also do a lot of work. My law partner and I do a lot of work with a organization that was started by pastors to try to encourage military Christians in the military to take stands for their faith. So that's Stand With Warriors. So standwithwarriors.org. Michael Cassidy, a Navy reservist, who's the guy that beheaded the Bayonet statue in the Iowa State Capitol. He's a part of that as well. So that's a great organization, standwithwarriors.org.
Yeah, and I'll put all of that in the description below so people will find it really, really easy. Yeah, man. Well, I want to thank you again. It was a lot of fun. I loved going through this movie. It's rewatching it. It's one of those movies that are just timeless. It'll be good.
Absolutely.
It was good when it was released. It was good now. It'll be good in 20 years from now. Yeah, it's just fun. Tom Cruise is awesome. He's the last. He's a weirdo. And
he is a weirdo.
He's a weirdo.
It's great in this movie.
But he's really good at making
movie.
movies. So again, Davis, thank you so much. Guys, thanks for listening. If you wouldn't mind, like, subscribe, share, do all that stuff. If you want to support us, check out our shop, vindicatedproductions.com, Watchwell shop. You can get a hoodie, blanket, hat, whatever. We really appreciate those that support us, and we will see you next time. And if you're going to watch, don't forget to watch well. See you guys.